The Erik Karlsson deal where Kyle Dubas is moving and shaking.
You had a tweet about that, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. That thing went viral quickly because
you had some responses, too.
I got a lot of responses. you noticed that with X, right?
Yes, with X.
Formerly known as Twitter.
Yeah.
You can tweet about a lot of different things. And the more provocative you are, the more of a response you're going to get. And I didn't tweet this out about Dubas thinking it was going to provoke people necessarily. But what I recognized pretty quickly, and I think I knew this anyway, is Kyle Dubas is a very polarizing guy, incredibly polarizing. And if you were attached to the Maple Leafs in any capacity at any point in your career, especially if it's recently, people are going to react to that. And there it is up on TSN 2. After the Karlsson deal went out, I was actually up north, and I just tweeted out, Kyle Dubas has become the NHL's pace car for making moves. From bunt singles to grand slams, he's got the stones and vision to pull off deals. He's never shy. Now, the reactions immediately were from every possible angle on that. I want to clarify, that was not me suggesting he's the best GM in the league. I do not believe he's the best GM in the league. That is not suggesting all the moves he makes are good moves. Far from it. He's made a lot of terrible, terrible trades. But when you speak of activity and a guy who seems to be in on everything and a guy who gets his mindset on something and finds a way to get it done, I stand by that. I think Dubas, you look at what he did at the trade deadline, you look at the moves he made on July 1. Now, those were not trades, but a lot of turnover in Pittsburgh immediately. And he was hot on the trails of Karlsson, and he found a way to make that work.
I had an experience reading that tweet because X is the way it is now. You don't know who's real and who's fake. There's a lot of parody accounts. I had to click on the profile and make sure it was actually yours because I was like, why is someone pretending to be Hayes right now?
I'm not verified anymore.
I'm not verified. About Kyle Dubas and how he's the pace car in the NHL for trades. Right. I couldn't believe my eyes. And then Craig chimes in, and he's like, no, Kelly McCrimmon is the pace car. But I will say this, man. It is the Kyle Dubas show. He's the president. He named himself the general manager.
Right.
He has no one to answer to. He is going to do whatever he wants. And I wonder now if the moves that he's making here in Pittsburgh, these are the moves he was trying to make in Toronto, but he couldn't get it done for one reason or another. But it's his show now.
Well, it is. But what I think you need to probably supply when it comes to context of this conversation. And I think what also needs to be accepted here in terms of what Dubas is dealing with in Pittsburgh that I think he was dealing with here is in Pittsburgh, he does not have the ability to trade core pieces. He doesn't have the power to do it. He can't trade Sidney Crosby even if he wanted to. He does not have the power to do that. I don't believe he'd have the power to trade Evgeny Malkin. Chris Letang possibly, but I think that would really upset the apple cart. I don't think he could. Now, they'd all have no trades, no movements, but I'm talking ownership and I'm talking legacy pieces. Even if he wanted to change the core in Pittsburgh, he did not have the power to do that. I think the same thing applied in Toronto. I think, interestingly enough, he's dealing with a very similar scenario. I think that's ultimately why Pittsburgh probably went after him, because they realized it's a very different situation, or it's a very similar situation. I think he bought into the idea that he wasn't moving off a core piece in Toronto. I don't know if he still believed in that vision at the end. I kind of get the impression there may have been some butting heads there.
Right.
I believe Shanahan still abides by that philosophy. And based on the reports out there, they're going to try to sign Matthews long-term. They're going to try to sign Willie long-term. Marner's still here. Tavares is still here. Keefe is coming back. Morgan Riley's coming back. It would suggest to me that Brendan Shanahan is still a believer in keeping that core and working around it, and that's effectively what Brad Treliving can work with. And that would be the difference in terms of, comparing Dubas to Vegas. And Craig brings up a very good point. It's tough to argue that Vegas is incredibly active. But I think that started with their owner, Bill Foley, from day one. Loyalties for losers. Move on from anyone you have to. If there's an upgrade out there, chase it, go get it. And then that filtered down to George McPhee, and then eventually got to Kelly McCrimmon. With Dubas, I think in terms of his attacking the roster when he was in Toronto and now in Pittsburgh, again, he's working under a different guideline that there are 4 or 5 guys you're not allowed to touch. You got to work around all the edges here. And that's what he was operating with in Toronto, and that's what he's doing now in Pittsburgh.
It's interesting because he brings in Karlsson, who's 33, and all those guys are, 35, 36? Like, they're all in that ballpark. So it makes sense that they're all going to try and go for it together, right? Because if you have a team where it's too contrasting, you have, like, a crop of young guys and a crop of old guys, it doesn't work. Like, it's always going to be segregated in the room, on the ice. It's just the way it is. But what he's done here now is he's going to give it's got to be at least a 2-year run here to try and make something happen with this group. So if this year doesn't go well, it's got to be next year. They got to give it another go in 2 years. And then he's bought himself more time with the Penguins down the road, because then it turns into, all right, now I need a couple years to strip this thing down and acquire the pieces for the future, acquire the cap space. Then it's another year, 3-4 year process to say, now we need to build it back up. Let me see my vision out. Like, this guy bought himself 6-7 years.
Possibly a decade.
Yeah,
possibly a decade.
This whole process from trying to salvage every last bit of this core group to the next group that comes up in that Penguins organization could be a decade. And he's basically built out that runway here now.
Well, I think that's exactly what's happened here. I would assume Dubas, when speaking with ownership down there, said they have probably a 2-year window. They do not have a 4-year window.
Even though those guys are under contract for 4 years,
they do not have the
not
full 4 years.
4-year window.
No, and I'm not convinced they're a playoff team right now. I do think they're better today. I think the Karlsson deal eventually will be a disaster because it's $10 million, and at the end of the deal, who knows what he's going to bring to the table. And again, it's just adding more, big dollar core players, and I don't believe the philosophy is going to work. I don't believe they're going to win a cup in the next 2 years. Could they make the playoffs? Yes, they absolutely could. They just missed this past year. If everything breaks their way, I like the Riley Smith deal. Obviously you sign a Chari. Now you bring in Karlsson. They're a better team. Pittsburgh's a better team today than when Dubas took over. But you got about a 2-year deal here where I'm assuming he pitched, I'm going to do everything I can for 2 years to try to find some glory. And then I think you're right. The final 2, it's like we're going to be a disaster, and there's a very good chance in 3 or 4 years they're the worst team in the league by a substantial margin. Like, nothing in the cupboard. The guys are done. We got nothing here.
Yeah.
Nothing here.
He's never been in that spot, though.
No, exactly. He inherited a very good team when he took over for Lou Lamoriello.
Always had a good team. They're probably going to be a very good regular season team in Pittsburgh. They've always had good regular season teams here in Toronto. And at some point, it's going to be the very first time that Kyle Dubas can actually build a team from scratch, from the bottom up, like bottoming out. He's never done that before. So add that to your sales pitch. I've never done that before. You guys don't know what that's going to look like. You know what I mean? So
I know, but that's going to take some patience, man.
Yeah.
Like, that again is...
But it's coming.
It's absolutely coming. It is coming in Pittsburgh. 2 or 3 years from now, it is going to be a stark reality. And I think they know it. They're embracing it. They're accepting it. And I don't argue against a 2-year window where this is who you are, because you've had an unbelievable 15 years.
Always the
Your
cream
15
of the crop.
years have been great.
Always the elite team, always like the benchmark for everyone else around the league. But I don't blame the Penguins for trying to like squeeze every last bit out of this, because if Ottawa and Buffalo are going to make the playoffs, force them to make the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just say, "Oh, they're coming, so I think we're just going to roll over and pack it in." They're young, they're very good, but they are unproven. Make them force you to miss the playoffs. Boston. Think about all these teams that are going to be on the bubble next year. You're going to have Boston, Pittsburgh, Islanders, Ottawa, Buffalo. Detroit, I think, is a little further back. I think Florida could be on the bubble. There's going to be a lot of good teams that miss the playoffs, and there's going to be a lot of teams in that same vicinity. Do you buy Columbus being in with the? I think Columbus is closer to Detroit.
Yeah, right? I don't think they're taking that big of a jump.
But man, it's going to be there's going to be a lot of teams vying for those 2 wild card spots in the East.
It's going to be a race in the East. And it's going to be tough.
And San Jose getting rid of Karlsson and only getting the protected first-round pick just goes to show you how much general managers value cap space over futures and picks and prospects. Right. Give me the cap space. Number 1 weapon you can have in this league right now.
Yeah, exactly. It has been for quite some time. That's what you get in a hard salary cap world, and especially with a lack of jump over the last few years because of COVID. There's been no flexibility. And Karlsson, it's it's an indictment on the league and the way that they operate, that the guy can put up one of the great offensive seasons of all time, and it's effectively a salary dump.
Yeah.
Like, there were one or two teams in the league that would take him on. You had absolutely no leverage. Like, the deal, it's not a good deal. Like, San Jose got nothing for Karlsson, except for $10 million a year off the books for the next 4 years.
Yeah.
And they understand they're terrible. They're going to be terrible for another 2 or 3 years. Like, San Jose is going to be an awful team. And they're building towards a 3 or 4 year plan, and they're going to try to accumulate whatever they can, including as much cap space as they can get.